Ross, sauce it up.
Boys, my wheels got in my bag and I got out my field. I'm getting this paper, I'm stacking a meal. I'm with your hoe in the house on the hills. Yeah. I'ma keep it real, had to sacrifice to try to get my bands up. Shorty wanna fuck with me, she see me on the camera. She say she in love with me, but really I can't stand her. She just want part of this life cause she see me on the...
Hey everyone, welcome to Absolute Fiction. Feel free to comment, like, and subscribe. Today, I will present to you all, what if Sasuke was in high school DXD? It was not a specific sound that awoke Sasuke, but rather a feeling of foreboding that emanated from his very being. Rolling off his bed, the 7-year-old rubbed sleep from his eyes and began shuffling to his parents' bedroom. Mother would soothe him and rub his back, and he could go back to sleep feeling safe again. His father disliked such practices, and Sasuke did not doubt he would feel his disapproving gaze the entire time until he went back to bed. So unlike Itachi, the eyes of his father seemed to say as they silently reprimanded his weakness. Sasuke vividly remembered the day his nightmares began, when Itachi came home covered in blood after an assassination mission gone wrong. When Itachi first joined the Anbu, father had secretly ordered Itachi to give him a mission debrief before reporting in to his superiors. Information was power after all, and father never doubted that Itachi would soon be on very important missions. The only exception was when he was specifically ordered to debrief with the Hokage. In those instances only, Itachi would report to father immediately after. Thus, a bloodied Itachi had dragged himself to report the mission details before going to the hospital. A stone-faced Fugaku had received Itachi's halting report with no expression as the blood pooled on the mat. After confirming the report was complete, the stony exterior softened slightly as Fugaku ordered Itachi to report for treatment and not return until he was fit for duty. Itachi, expressionless as ever, had bowed and dragged himself out without another word. Only Sasuke had heard Fugaku's quiet murmur of "That's my boy." The nightmares began that night. Some were of Sasuke falling on the battlefield, bloody all over like Itachi had been. Others were of his father's disapproving face looming over him, the stony look never morphing to anything softer. Shaking himself from his thoughts, Sasuke paused as he reached his parents' bedroom. Usually there was some slight shifting around, deep breathing from his father, something. Then, he saw them. His parents were right next to each other on the floor, dead. Thump thump, thump thump. Sasuke froze as time seemed to stand still, and then he was there, in the shadows. Foolish little brother. Sasuke stiffened as he realized what was going on. Sighing in weary realization, Sasuke cleared his groggy mind and discarded the thoughts of his terrified 7-year-old self to confront his brother. Itachi, it is good to see you again, even if only in my nightmares. A fully mature Sasuke murmured. Itachi cocked his head and began to speak when a piercing alarm brought Sasuke to wakefulness. Acting on instinct, 16-year-old Sasuke immediately bisected the offending device without opening his eyes. He felt immediate regret as yet more Ryo were wasted for absolutely no reason, the simple device now lying in a smoking heap on the nearby windowsill. Sighing, Sasuke mused that being trained to kill was very useful, in war. In everyday civilian life, it tended to become an expensive habit. One that most veterans had problems breaking. That was doubly so when he found himself in this new existence following death in his previous life. He had few regrets from what he remembered of his last life, outside wishing he could have been a better father to Sarada and husband to Sakura. While he was young, he lived for the village and often neglected his family. It was only as an old man after Sakura had passed that he realized how distant he had been in the name of duty. He and Naruto had broached the subject more than once after Naruto had given up the hat, both feeling proud of their career but wishing they could have been there more for their family. The old men had gotten a chuckle out of seeing their children have virtually the exact same relationship they had, only in reverse. It had been one of Sasuke's proudest moments when Sarada took up the hat, though it was only years later that he was able to accurately express his pride to her. Surprisingly, Sasuke remembered little of the events that led him to being on this world. All he remembered was his daughter's sad face as she held his hand on his deathbed, while his little grandchildren all gathered around. The rascals all looked like their other grandfather, of course. It was the whisker marks that gave it away, right before it all went black. After that, nothing. Then one morning, he regained consciousness in a field outside Kuo town. He had been shocked to find that he had both of his arms intact. His body felt like it had right before the Fourth Great War, putting him at roughly 16. It is only after experiencing the indignities of old age that one can truly appreciate a young body that does not have aches, pains and old scars that keep one awake at night. The next thing to check was his chakra and combat abilities, which were present but changed. He was able to touch chakra just fine, though there was a certain amount of pain he was not used to when he channeled larger jutsus. As far as he could tell, the pain was not causing any long-term damage. It just felt like trying to force a thin stream to fill a large pipe and took significant concentration. Sasuke mused that it might have something to do with the available nature chakra in this world and his own. From his intelligence-gathering missions via the internet, which had taken some time to get used to, this world was far larger and more developed than the elemental nations had been. While there was much talk about magic and supernatural powers, it was generally all considered made-up fiction with no substance. From what he could tell, the human population on this planet had moved away from personal power ideals, such as chakra and magic, thousands of years ago and focused instead on collective technological advances. It was 80 years ago that this world had changed, when the first and only nuclear bombs had been dropped on a civilian population in the very country he now resided. Seeing the pictures, Sasuke could not fathom the destruction capabilities this world had. Sure, he could replicate a small nuclear blast with Shinra Tensei, but only a few individuals in the history of the elemental nations could accomplish such a feat. Here, they apparently had thousands of exponentially stronger devices in countries like the US and Russia just waiting to be used. Sasuke mused that every world seemed to have its share of wild cards. Here it was nuclear weapons, back home it was the tailed beasts. Looking up into the mirror, Sasuke grimaced as he saw his Mangekyo Sharingan and Rinnegan eyes activate and immediately turned them off, bringing his onyx eyes back into focus. While he was glad to still have them, his eyes often activated now if he had a battle flashback or adrenaline surge. This understandably made for an awkward situation when it occurred out in public, as people of this world do not have ocular jutsus of any sort. Luckily the one time it occurred was near an impressionable youth that loudly proclaimed his contact lenses were sick and demanded to know where he had acquired them. Drawing on years of experience, Sasuke had looked bored and kept going, only deactivating his eyes when he had lost his enthusiastic follower. While the young man was more a groupie than a fangirl, the old evasion tactics still worked perfectly well after all these years. Quickly showering and donning his school uniform, Sasuke assumed his broad posture that had done wonders for him during his academy days back in Konoha and began his walk to school. During his early years he had adopted a very broody exterior because he was constantly tired from nightmares and wanted to be left alone. As an old man, he looked back on his naivety and chuckled at his mostly self-created past misfortunes. As a young man, Sasuke had been handsome, rich, talented and unavailable. He honestly could not have done anything else to get the young female population stirred up after him more, especially since he was never actually rude to them outside trying to pretend they weren't there. Looking back, Sasuke realized that there were many more intelligent options on the table if he had spent any time actually thinking of solutions instead of always training and obsessing over Itachi. The simplest solution would have been to pick one girl out of the pack and dub her his girlfriend, then set parameters on how and when they would spend time together. Sacrificing part of one day a week would have been far better than the constant handing he received instead. Or, he could have said that he was not interested in girls at all. Sasuke winced at that internally as he dodged a telephone pole. Then again, the only thing worse than all the girls pursuing him directly would have been all the girls demanding to be the one to set up their BFF Sasuke. Walking silently down the road, Sasuke repressed a shudder and asked himself why he was getting entangled in teenage drama yet again. In the elemental nations, he had been focused all the time on work from a young age. Training every day from the time he could walk, then missions from puberty to retirement. He always suspected that Orochimaru had a hand in the way he mentally developed certain attitudes and practices, either from the cursed seal or through subtle manipulation in the years they trained together. Either way, he had never been overly interested in women during his teenage years and had only later developed feelings for Sakura after saving the world with Naruto. Granted, he had come to a lot of revelations during that time that changed him as a person, one of those being how long Sakura had truly cared for him. "You there? Why aren't you in class?" Ah yes, that's why he was going back to the adolescent snake pit known as school, truancy officers. "I'm headed to QO Academy, sir." Being polite to authority figures was generally a smart way to not stand out, something he learned the hard way years after he and Naruto saved the world. A willingness to fight always led him back to an exasperated Naruto that railed at his ability to piss off both the client and the target simultaneously. "Isn't that an all-girls school?" the officer asked with suspicion. Rolling his eyes, Sasuke replied, "Apparently they recently opened to the male population and have been desperately trying to find guys to go there. For some reason my name came up and I received a letter." The officer looked skeptical, but decided to let him go with a warning to be on time from now on. Nodding his head seriously, Sasuke resumed his journey while internally chuckling to himself. Honestly, it would be child's play to disable any number of truancy officers they sent after him. Or he could always hypnotize them into seeing what he wanted using the Sharingan, but why bother? This world was so mundane it made him want to beat his head against something hard, but hurting people doing their job was not who he was. Not anymore at least. Plus, he needed time to plan his next move. Today was his first day of class, so he could get a feel for the operational environment he would be in for the next few years. Apparently it was commonplace for students of this world to learn subjects such as science, arithmetic and writing until they were 18, then to either go to university to study or go into the workforce. The whole setup was very strange to Sasuke. He had been a trained killer and veteran of many battles at 16. Here, people did not usually begin their careers until at least 18, sometimes older. Sasuke had briefly considered going to another country and trying to join the military, but immediately rejected the idea. For some strange reason, he felt tied to Japan, to this town in particular. Any thoughts of leaving made him uneasy. Maybe in a few years he would leave, once he felt that he understood this world better and could confidently decide on a better location. Walking up to the front gate of QO Academy, Sasuke mentally reviewed the curriculum in his head. Luckily he only had to brush up on Japanese, as they spoke a slightly different dialect here. The rest he had learned in the few months since he had received his letter and been accosted by the truancy officers. Many had called him a genius in the elemental nations. They were not wrong, though he was not sure what that would have made Itachi. He had learned very quickly. Itachi had looked and just known what to do with nearly everything. It was only later in life he realized what two-edged sword that must have been for his brother, to be expected to instantly understand everything while always being incredibly bored since he had nothing to strive for. Following the easy-to-read signs, Sasuke headed towards the front office and scanned the crowd of students. Internally shuddering, Sasuke felt like the walls were closing in when he realized how many girls there were, and how many were looking at him and giggling. It was like Konoha, times 10 because of the population density. He pulled his collar up. "Ooh, so cute," came from the peanut gallery and fully engaged Sasuke's long dormant gag reflex, and sped up a bit while continuing to scan the crowd. Luckily, attention was taken off him instantly as a young blonde man appeared at the gate and was instantly mobbed. Wincing in sympathy, Sasuke locked eyes with the target of their worship. The two briefly exchanged a look of shared suffering before carrying on with their respective duties. Yuto Kiba, or Kiba as most of the girls surrounding him shamelessly called him. He would have to look him up later. Having someone as a source of information would be useful, especially since he would wager this Kiba knew absolutely everything that went on in this school thanks to his fawning fangirls. Walking into the front office, Sasuke immediately honed in on the young woman waiting by the front desk as if she was expecting him. She had the confident, well-balanced posture that told him two things immediately: she was a leader, and she knew how to fight. Granted, her posture said more along the lines of martial artist than trained killer, but that was to be expected in this vanilla world. She cut a tall shapely figure with midnight-colored short hair, a modest chest and keen lavender eyes that studied him intently from under a pair of spectacles. He briefly saw surprise on her features before she approached him and extended her hand confidently. "A pleasure to make your acquaintance, Sasuke-san. I am Student Council President Sona Sitri. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our prestigious academy." Taking her hand firmly, Sasuke replied, "Thank you for your kind words, President. Please take care of me." Sona minutely straightened at his words, and Sasuke knew his initial read was correct. Many authority figures love to be addressed as such without any prompting or pandering, like it was their due. Sona was apparently one such person. "Perfect. I was wondering if you could tell me a bit about the school and what is expected of me while we walk, President." "Of course, Sasuke-kun. QO Academy has a long standard of academic excellence, and I expect you to." Sona monologued for quite some time while pointing out notable structures around the campus as Sasuke attentively plied her with questions and made noises in all the right places. "One of the first rules you learn as a shinobi was to leave your pride at the door. While some missions were quite bloody, the overwhelming majority had you either running recon for a patrol or sometimes guarding important figures that demanded you stroke their ego periodically. Failure to do so usually led to a dressing down from the Hokage and reduction in pay, not to mention potential loss of standing for the village. It was the last that got Sasuke to shape up more than anything. The village losing respect because of his failures was not an acceptable reality for him. And that completes our tour, Sasuke-kun. Any questions for me before you head into class?" "Just one question, President. What can you tell me about group of 3 boys that sits at the middle table before school taking pictures? They seem to stand out from the usual student populace." As Sona's face went dark, Sasuke winced internally at his faux pas. Apparently those 3 were quite the landmine. Sona went on for 10 minutes about their reprehensible behavior that disgraces this school daily. She further proceeded to tell Sasuke that he would do well to never be seen with them. Apparently they were seen as extreme undesirables by most of the student body. Rolling his eyes internally, Sasuke swore up and down that he would never encourage their perversions and would do his best to avoid them when possible. After assuring Sona he could find his way to class, Sasuke navigated his way to homeroom. He was only slightly late, so the teacher took the opportunity to introduce him to the class. Surprisingly, he was in the same homeroom as the 3 infamous figures, who all stared daggers at him and muttered "pretty boy" under their breath at him. Infamous they may be, but all 3 together have nothing on Naruto when it came to the annoying department. He studiously ignored them and sat down right next to them, much to the disappointment of the swooning girls who had all scrambled to create seats in their respective areas. Soon after class had started, the ringleader of the group leaned over. "Get out of here, pretty boy. You are ruining whatever small chance we normal men have at women," the boy whispered furiously. Sasuke snorted as the girls threw concerned glances at him, likely they were worried he would be tainted by the other boy's perversion. As someone who had been married in his past life, worked as a full-time ninja for nearly 40 years and seen plenty of things he would rather unsee in Orochimaru's labs, he doubted anything they were into was inherently shocking or would surprise him. The only part of them that ruffled his feathers was how fangirlish their behavior was towards attractive women. How they stalked their prey was very similar. The only difference of course being that not even the boldest fangirls would have peeped on him changing or anything similarly invasive. They settled themselves with making him miserable in public places. Studiously ignoring the 3 increasingly agitated boys, they eventually got the message, after much huffing and threatening, and pulled out pornographic magazines to peruse. Snickering amongst each other, it was like they were immune to the collective dark aura that collected around all the girls in the classroom like a living miasma. Sasuke was not afraid per se, but was also not a fool and knew where and when to pick his battles. Even if they weren't completely perverted, Sasuke would steer far away from these 3, as they were a magnet for female ire and attention. Sighing in boredom, Sasuke resigned himself to a very boring 8-hour stretch each day until graduation. And of course as such things go, lightning struck somewhere and the fates howled with laughter. Chidori. Chidori current. Susanoo. Gasping for air, Sasuke stood inside a fully developed skeletal frame that looked like an early rendition of his Susanoo. Grimacing, Sasuke held the form for a full 5 minutes before releasing it with a groan and sprawling out on the ground, utterly spent. Currently he was in the exact same clearing he had used to enter this world, though thankfully he was fully clothed at the moment. After studying the topography, he would have traded his Sharingan for Google Earth any day back home, and scouting the area, he had determined that there were no humans for miles surrounding this open clearing. The nearest human structure was a noisy mining facility that conveniently masked the sound of his training, though he did not test his luck by trying some of his more destructive techniques. Along with the chance for discovery was the fact that he was still adjusting to the dearth of energy in this world. It was not like he needed any of his techniques on this world anyways. He had a few run-ins with the local Yakuza in his fund acquisition missions. After all, getting an identity, an apartment, fictional parents and an offshore bank account all cost a great deal of money. Luckily, the security on this world was laughable compared to anything his previous world had to offer. True, he was initially shocked when his hench was recognized in the street and he had to quickly dispatch some local toughs looking to recover their hard-earned drug money. This puzzled him given how easily he had dispatched the guards at each location, making off with both the money and the drugs without a hitch. After some more digging via Google he had found a large amount of information on security cameras and silent alarms. Fortunately, a Chaku-assisted shuriken easily decimated most security cameras and silent alarms were only useful against slow or clumsy burglars. Forensics were a little trickier, though he doubted most of the places he robbed would ever involve the local authorities in their business. Just to be on the safe side, he always wore gloves and a mask that held his hair in place. Having served a brief stint on Anbu when Naruto was short-staffed meant he was used to the mask and subterfuge, even if it was not his favorite way to operate. He generally preferred the direct approach when he needed something, though he accepted that this flimsy world would likely freak out if they realized the full extent of his abilities. Finally catching his breath, Sasuke began to do a push-up regiment. Each repetition raised him higher off the ground and eliminated a finger until he finished with his left index finger, finally resetting back to both hands. He stopped at 100 sets before limbering up for some sprints and running. Running some laps around the barren wasteland made Sasuke wince. The clearing was pocked full of burn marks and tears in the landscape from his techniques. Unfortunately this meant that anyone passing the area would be very curious about what had occurred here in the supposed middle of nowhere. Focusing intently, Sasuke adopted a meditation pose and began to smooth out the ground using his rarely utilized earth chakra. Though not his weakest element, wind had that distinction, he was not strong with earth and needed to be completely immobilized for the easiest of tasks. If he was able to regain his previous level of proficiency with his favorite techniques, he planned to branch out into the other elements and at least become passively efficient with them. There was little else to do on this world anyways, even stealing from large criminal enterprises was child's play. He already had a massive bank account in the Caymans and a large stash of various drugs he stockpiled for a rainy day. Or who knows, perhaps one day he would get bored and torch the whole drug supply just to see the entire town get high. Oh gods! He was becoming Naruto. He needed something to focus on while he was training to regain his proficiency. He had already completed all the assigned lessons for the year. The teachers were overjoyed at having such a serious student in their class, though mostly Sasuke just wanted one less nuisance to deal with, but he had refused outright when they talked of him testing out of high school entirely. Old instincts from his infiltration days dictated not standing out. This was compounded by his disdain for being seen as a genius by everyone. Along with being expected to know everything, all the time, everyone felt entitled to bother you with mundane questions you cared nothing about. The best way to not ever be bothered was to be the dumb kid of the class, but Sasuke's pride would never allow for that to happen. The most important reason why he didn't fast-track to something more satisfying was because there was nothing particularly satisfying to him out there. Most jobs were so cookie-cutter boring they looked worse than the classroom, a day-to-day reality Sasuke would never accept. Since his gut told him to stay put in Japan, he discarded ideas of joining a foreign military or intelligence force. Besides, he would wager that most of those positions would be desk jobs in the end anyways. No, until he was able to find something worth his time he would continue at Kyu Academy. Maybe he could set up an empire similar to Gato's back in Wave Country as a hobby? He didn't think it would be particularly hard to topple the Yakuza leaders and control things from the shadows. Sighing deeply, Sasuke opened his eyes and surveyed the restored plain around him. Fresh dirt now covered all the wounds that the earth had received, leaving a completely boring mesa in place once more. Perfect. Going straight into a shunshin, Sasuke raced back to his apartment and attempted to beat his best time to date. The next morning was predictably mundane and saw a bored Sasuke sitting through his classes while occasionally answering questions as needed. He had made a game out of studying extra the night before and showing up the teacher in class, but stopped after the teacher in question began sobbing in joy at the brightest student to ever attend their class. Class mercifully ended and allowed Sasuke to begin patrol around the school while the students mindlessly conversed on different subjects. Old habits died hard, and Sasuke had always been an expert at sifting through conversations and filing away key details. Very little was filed away lately for obvious reasons. Still, Sasuke always took the time to keep his skills sharp even when the returns were poor. One curious thing he had noticed was the occasional mention of contracts and even the word devil once. While the content was not overly surprising given the few goth girls that attended the school, it was the source that surprised him. It was usually the president's entourage that would occasionally slip up and mention the terms that very much did not fit their image. Focused, hard-working and productive members of society were rarely associated with the occult in Sasuke's experience. It was usually the obscenely rich or the depressingly poor that were ensnared. The cult of Jashin back home was a good example of this, though most of its worshippers were entirely without sanity at a certain point. Working his way through the crowd, Sasuke immediately covered his ears as a deafening exultation of Rias' summer burst forth from the surrounding girls that had formerly been sneaking glances at him. Grimacing in pain, Sasuke melted back through the quickly growing crowd and activated his eyes once he was safely back in the shadows. As he examined the cheerful, and very well endowed, redhead along with her similarly blessed raven-haired friend Kano, Sasuke was puzzled yet again. Something bothered him about these two. They, along with the president and some of her followers, exuded a massive level of energy that was far larger than any human in this world should have. Paired with their almost inhuman levels of beauty and their Tsunade-level assets, it made for an interesting conclusion. Most stories had a grain of truth held somewhere within them. What with this world's obsession with the supernatural, yet staunch denial of it in the same breath, he could not deny the possibility that there may be either superhumans out there or something other than humanity entirely. Kaguya was an excellent example that the boogeyman sometimes does in fact exist. Naruto and Sasuke were at the height of their power when they fought her. Had they not been granted the gifts of the sage they would not have even made it to that fight. In the end though, the two strongest ninjas in the world had been stalemated by a single alien entity. Here there very well may be more than just one Kaguya skulking around in the shadows. To be a good ninja was to be paranoid at all times. Still, Sasuke shelved his current thoughts for now until he acquired more evidence to support his tentative theories. Mentally, he added books on the occult and supernatural to his reading list for the evening. As if driven by some instinct, Kano stiffened and her gaze cut to his hiding place. Nothing but the shadowed alley between school buildings greeted her and she briefly frowned before resuming her bubbly facade. From atop the building, Sasuke continued to watch the two with renewed interest. No civilian should have been able to detect him, yet she knew he was watching her and had reacted very quickly to spy him out. Had he not seen her body language and surmised what was coming, he might have had an awkward situation to explain. As it was, he continued to watch from the shadows as they left the crowd behind, softly arguing about something. Sasuke descended the building and resumed the patrol, filing away that very interesting bit of info for the mental file he was creating on them. His patrol finished without further incident outside his usual nod to Yuto, which was returned in kind. They had never spoken a word to each other but were still brothers in arms just the same. Shared trauma breeds empathy after all. Class resumed and Sasuke applied a mild genjutsu to make it appear he was taking notes when he was actually sleeping soundly. It was important to train jutsu at all times after all. If training your jutsu happened to coincide with nap time, it was just an added bonus. At this stage, class was just a place to sharpen a few of his skills while technically obeying the local laws regarding truancy. With that being said, Sasuke would be the first to admit that recent developments with certain members of the student body had him interested. If there was truly more than just a bunch of villager-level humans on this planet, life might get a little more interesting after all. PSSSSST, Hey loser. Sasuke slowly awoke from his nap and watched the perverted ringleader through slitted eyes. In his mind's eye he pulled his mental dossier on the boy. Esei Hyodo. Age, 16. Occupation, second-year student at Kyoto Academy. Personality, most known for being a highly perverted individual, the pursuit of the female form defines his life so much that all his activities literally revolve around being a peeping Tom. Threat level, negligible. Added footnote, keep away from subject outside of class as association will draw increased potential fangirl attention or female ire, either are considered unacceptable mission losses. Rolling his eyes at Esei, Sasuke theatrically grunted and faced front once more. Don't ignore me you jerk. Esei hissed a little too loudly. Perhaps you could answer this for us Esei-kun? The teacher asked pointedly. Sasuke smirked in obvious amusement while still staring straight ahead, making steam come out of Issei's ears. Honestly, it was just too easy and way too much fun. He hadn't had this much fun since. A stony visage replaced Sasuke's smirk as he remembered who the boy reminded him so much of. Though their obsessions and appearances differed greatly, the same boneheaded energy seemed to drive them through life almost identically. The difference being, his best friend Naruto was dead some far universe away and he would never get to see him again. Sure, there were times when they had driven each other up the wall, and tried to kill each other, but that was greatly outweighed by the good times they had together. When they weren't working, you could usually find them arguing heatedly over a bowl of ramen at Ichiraku's over something stupid, like why hating tomatoes was a waste of time. As time went on and the two old men retired, they spent much of their twilight years training the next generation and sipping sake on the porch. Naruto had insisted Sasuke move in with young Hinata when Sakura had passed, and had stuck by that even when they had a real fight some weeks later. Most of the village was still in one piece after. In many ways, Sasuke grew to see Naruto as the brother he was never able to have in Itachi. Are you okay Sasuke-sama? One of his concerned sometimes fangirls asked from a few rows over. Coming back to himself, Sasuke realized that the whole class was staring at him as he breathed heavily at his seat, obviously in distress. He reined in his emotions brutally and put a relaxed face on while regulating his breathing. I'm fine, just had a bit too much caffeine at lunch, Sasuke replied in a languid fashion. Seeing his normal behavior reassert itself, the class resumed session and everyone turned front to listen to the teacher. Everyone save Issei. Issei was uneasy as he stared at Sasuke. For a minute there, he had seen a full range of emotion from the normally silent boy. Chalking it up to a fluke and shaking off his unease with well-practiced vigor, Issei plunked his nose in his favorite subscription and quietly tittered to himself. Sasuke, though still a bit shaken, had the remaining energy to roll his eyes. It was entirely possible the boy had some sort of hormonal imbalance considering just how obsessed he was with nude women. No one saw the small ghost of a smile on Sasuke's face. In truth, taking over the local Yakuza branches was depressingly easy. Using simple infiltration tactics along with his growing tech knowledge, Sasuke was able to quickly ferret out who most of the players were in the local Yakuza game. Honestly, the number of computer passwords taped underneath keyboards was alarming. He supposed these same individuals were the type to get their name or social security number tattooed somewhere on their body, just in case. From there all it took was a few conversations with the local leaders, who remembered none of it thanks to the Sharingan, to gather all the fuel he needed to set up a turf war. In general, most cities of any size have a decent amount of criminal activity. The term organized crime is really just another way of describing a pack of dogs sharing a bone. Snarling and eyeing each other, the local dogs only played nice because they got better treats and less discipline if they did. In the end, all it took was a little prodding to get them to embrace their natural inclinations. Inflaming old rivalries while providing just enough information to each faction for them to bleed each other dry led to a greatly diminished Yakuza presence within a few months. Crime against the general population went down significantly, leading to medals all around for the bigwigs in the local police department. As the turf war dragged on, the various syndicates began to grow impatient with their growing losses and reached out to the leaders of each gang involved. The local bosses panicked as each faction received word that their respective higher-ups were very displeased with the loss in profits that the war had caused, and that a permanent change in management was being considered. Thus, a meeting was set up on neutral ground to discuss terms that all parties could live with, quite literally. Exactly as Sasuke predicted they would. The impromptu meeting had barely begun when Sasuke appeared out of nowhere and blasted his honed killing intent at the assembled gang members. Out of the 30-odd attendees, perhaps 5 were able to remain conscious with a dazed look on their face. Marking them for potential future use, Sasuke promptly knocked them unconscious and began tying up everyone. After forcibly rousing the gang leaders, Sasuke painted a very clear picture for them using a combination of his carefully controlled killing intent and genjutsus. He initially spoke to them with harsh, guttural tones as he showed them a vision of what could happen if they did not comply. He mostly used his conversations with them to target their deepest fears and insecurities and create various hellscapes for their viewing pleasure. Needless to say, many bladders were loosed nearly simultaneously as the hardened bosses whimpered in absolute terror. Seeing that his point was coming across loud and clear, Sasuke then used honeyed tones, via genjutsu, to positively reinforce the ideas of them working together with him as their true leader. He explained how they would set aside 10% of their gross profit under the table to him, and in exchange they would receive his protection and favor. It was a complete lie of course, but they didn't need to know that. Just as the Sharingan could be used to supercharge terrible genjutsus such as the demonic illusion, hell viewing technique he had just used on them, it also could be used to stimulate the other side of things as well. Much as Naruto had shamelessly spammed the harem jutsu to powerful short-term effect, there were similar seduction and pleasure techniques that were moderately effective on unguarded ninja and devastatingly effective to a common civilian. After repeating his commands to them multiple times while overcharging their pleasure senses through genjutsu, Sasuke felt confident that this was a good start. As they looked up at him reverently, for now, Sasuke ordered them to proceed as he had instructed and get everything in order. When asked for a name as he was leaving and the bosses were collecting themselves, Sasuke grinned and told them Kakashi. Weeks passed and he was shocked to receive his first monthly payment right on time at the dead drop specified to them. While confident in his skills, he never underestimated the human ability to rationalize the unexplainable in order to fit their desires. He had assumed the bosses would throw off his compulsion in a few weeks and he would have to step in and make an example or two before they fell into line. He was curious if they had been that scared by his display or truly so weak-minded his rough mental conditioning had deeply rooted in their mind. In the end it made no real difference. He had no qualms about eliminating the bosses if it became necessary. After what he had heard in his conversations with them he had been tempted to take out the trash on the spot. In the end his ruthlessly practical side had won out and they were allowed to live. For now. While Sasuke had left behind his villain persona years ago after his defeat at the hands of one Uzumaki Naruto, he had always retained a cold side to him that embraced brutal practicality. Years around his friends and family had tempered it somewhat, but on missions it often forcefully reasserted itself. As far as Sasuke was concerned, this new life was one big mission. He just had not figured out the objectives yet. Thus he was willing to deal with the seedy element of society, even accept their dirty money if it meant furthering the mission. As Sasuke viewed his rapidly increasing bank account from the comfort of his private condo overlooking the city, he let a loud sigh. Now that he had the local toughs under his thumb, there was one less thing for him to do when he wasn't at school or training. He could take a more active role in the Yakuza gangs, but he had never much cared for their methods. Ninja ran morally ambiguous operations for the good of their village on sanctioned missions. They didn't shake down the very people they were created to protect for funds or simple pleasure. Well, not in any real hidden villages anyways. The mist was full of psychos and the grass was literally founded by the psycho himself, so they didn't count. Drumming his fingers beside his keyboard, Sasuke considered the book on the occult he had just finished. Unfortunately, most of the books so far had been dead ends that were intended to interest easily impressionable teenagers. Then there were a few that would have made Orochimaru grin in delight. Needless to say those foul treatises were burned. Only a few had halfway believable information, most of which was contradicted by whatever next book he read. He could see why the people of this world considered such things to be fictional. Nevertheless, after grifting through all the useless trash he had found a few descriptions that fit what he was looking for. Some of the books on demonology had mentioned many of the traits he had seen in the schoolgirls. In fact, Rias Gremory was a shoe-in to be a succubus. Really, both she and her friend Kano seemed to fit the bill perfectly. Unfortunately, he had no real way to verify his tentative findings so far. He doubted direct confrontation would end well. If the schoolgirls ended up being on the same level as Kagaya, they would eat him alive and spit out his bones. Plus, more than a few things didn't add up, namely that the girls were not causing disruptions of any kind. Most demonology books agreed that demons, particularly young ones, had an obsessive need to feed. This often led to them being less than subtle and terrorizing entire populations, allegedly of course, as they sought to fill their bottomless hunger. No, still too many questions and not enough answers. Until something changed and he was able to learn more, he would not press his luck with the schoolgirls just yet. Which left his other pet project, Esei Hyodo. After his reluctant conclusion that Esei had much in common with his former best friend, he had shadowed him for a few days to get a better grasp on what made him tick. The results were pathetically predictable. He and his two friends, aka fellow perverts, took every waking moment of the day to obsess over women. They leered at them online, in person, from various hidey holes, etc. While Naruto had an unhealthy obsession with pranks early on, even he hadn't been nearly as dedicated in his daily devotion as these three. Another similarity between Naruto and Esei was their tendency to have die-hard convictions built on poor foundations. For Naruto, this had manifested through his constant declaration to be Hokage, while actively pissing off the Konoha populace at every turn. Granted, the deck had been stacked against him from day one, only his literal saving of the village from pain had changed popular opinion about him. Still, his early misadventures through pranking had done nothing but push him further from his goals, something Naruto didn't fully realize until he had actually worn the hat for a few years. Isai's problem was more that he made a daily effort to sully his public reputation with girls through his poorly disguised escapades with his two sidekicks. A very basic rule of negotiation is to avoid pissing off the group you are trying to reach an agreement with. Obviously those three idiots had never considered girls to be more than a collection of parts for viewing pleasure, something that their behavior screamed for them louder than their words ever could. Amateur psychology hour aside, Sasuke didn't really care much about Isai's behavior. Sure, it was stupid, wasteful and wouldn't get him near his self-proclaimed goal, but that was his business. He had seen plenty of people come and go that ended up destroying themselves through poor behavior choices. Truthfully, Sasuke was pretty close to writing him off as one of the before-mentioned cases of self-sabotage before he had seen him with his dojutsu activated. What he sensed immediately destroyed any ideas he had of leaving the boy to rot. Issei was a normal human in terms of energy, what he had lurking somewhere inside him was not. He could not make out the shadowy figure he sensed within Issei, outside of the fact that in terms of power it was close to being on the level of the strongest Bujuu. This shadowy presence lurking inside the boy gave him the justification he felt necessary to reach out to Issei. Sasuke was not a humanitarian. If Issei had been a completely average human, with a possible hormonal imbalance, Sasuke would have left him to his vices. As it was, what was inside him had caught Sasuke's interest. As a bonus, he had a feeling that the more he could learn about Issei and his shadowy tenant, the more he may be able to learn about the schoolgirls and their situation. Sasuke stood and stretched before beginning to change into his workout clothes. Everything was lining up nicely. "What do you mean you have a girlfriend? You traitor!" screamed one of the perverted trio as he decked Issei and began sobbing in depression. Watching the drama play out with no small amount of amusement, Sasuke made notes on his mental file of the other two perverts. Matsuda and Motohama were their names. Apparently they were the type of friends to drag down Issei just because they were failing in their own goals to date. Sasuke had known many ninja that exhibited similar surly traits. Sasuke himself had similar jealousies in his youth towards Naruto's growing power, causing it to be one of the factors that made him leave the village. Sasuke shook his head at his own stupidity. Had Orochimaru been able to take his body faster, he would have been quite dead for his lack of judgment. As it turned out, he had been very lucky and barely been able to defeat the monster after 3 years of training under him. "I thought you guys would be happy for me. I'm finally taking the first step towards our dreams of having harems of Opie and you're mad at me?" Issei yelled from the ground in a hurt tone. "Yes. Because neither of us have girlfriends and you do. We were supposed to be together in our misery. Motohama shouted back at Issei, leading away and consoling a distraught Matsuda. Why him and not us? Why him and not us? Matsuda babbled to himself nonsensically as he was led away by an increasingly concerned Motohama. Sasuke chuckled to himself. Well, the show certainly didn't disappoint, though he was left with one crucial question. What kind of girl would be insane enough to go out with such a known pervert? Issei-kun. A clear voice rang from around the corner of the hall before revealing who he could only assume was the girl in question. Sasuke raised an eyebrow. He had expected a homely girl, one with low self-esteem that might be willing to put up with Issei's eccentricities towards women since he was actually not a bad-looking guy, objectively speaking of course. Instead, a long-legged beauty on par with Rias and Kano came demurely towards Issei and shyly inquired if he was ready to go on their date. In terms of appearance, she had long silky black hair, tranquil amethyst eyes and substantial assets for her slim build. Of course, Yayuma-chan. Let's go. Issei yelled excitedly as he grabbed her hand and dragged her towards the door. For just a second, the girl's mask slipped when Issei grabbed her hand. It was a brief flash that anyone would have missed unless they were trained in reading micro-expressions, but Sasuke saw the slip loud and clear. Absolute disgust shone through very briefly before she resumed her laughing facade and followed Issei out the door. Interesting. Sasuke resigned himself to a boring evening of watching an awkward first date. Something didn't add up about this girl, and he was tired of things that did not add up. First the girls at this school, now another one from the outside displaying some of the strange baffling behavior. He would wager his Sharingan that if he looked at her with his dojutsu she would light up like a Christmas tree. He didn't expect much to come of staking out the first date, outside having to acquire a large bottle of Pepto-Bismol later if things moved faster than expected. Still though, any ninja running infiltration or reconnaissance will tell you the key is patience. Acquire all the puzzle pieces, put them together and repeat. Oftentimes it's the smallest puzzle piece that helps you recognize the pattern. He was hopeful Yayuma would be a useful little piece in figuring out this deepening mystery. Taking a calming breath, Sasuke walked out of the academy gates and began to trail the happy couple towards their first date. The date was surprisingly tasteful, a brief meal at a local eatery with pleasant conversation, followed by a nice walk through the park. Perhaps he had misjudged Issei. Somewhere in that perverted body beat the heart of a normal boy that just wanted his girl to have a good time. Well, maybe. The afternoon was still young and Sasuke knew there was still plenty of time for Issei to firmly insert his foot into his mouth. Then there was the object of Issei's affection, Yayuma. Sasuke suspected her given name was about as real as her smile or the rest of her charming persona. Credit where it was due though, she was one of the better actresses he had seen in a while. She had managed to effortlessly gloss over Issei's social faux pas while still maintaining the demure, giggling girl facade that most boys couldn't resist. Issei was on cloud nine the whole date, thinking he was knocking it out of the park given her reactions and demeanor. Which was the whole point. What Sasuke still didn't understand is what she wanted out of this that made her so willing to ingratiate herself to him. Female ninja would occasionally undertake missions that required them to ingratiate themselves with a target in such a way. Sometimes all it required was what he was seeing, the fawning, rapt attention that did not waver, the carefully placed compliments. Depending on the time frame and urgency of the mission, they would oftentimes initiate intimate relations to speed things along. The point though, is that it was all a facade, usually to get a high-value target to let something slip to impress his girlfriend, or oftentimes mistress. Thus his puzzlement over the scene that played out in front of him. Issei simply did not possess the outstanding good looks or the high charisma necessary to attract a girl of Yayuma's caliber. Normally he may be able to write it off as a girl rebounding on a relationship or something similarly mundane, were it not paired with her unusual energy signature. After activating his dojutsu she had immediately stiffened minutely and casually looked around while maintaining her facade. Yet another civilian that somehow knew exactly when they were being watched. As she relaxed and engaged Issei in conversation once more, Sasuke took a peek at her energy and recognized similar levels to what Rias and Kano possessed. Perhaps she was part of the same group they were? That did raise the question though as to why she was making a move on Issei when Sasuke had never seen any interest from either of the other girls. Perhaps she knew something they did not. They were competing factions within the same group? It seemed like all he had gotten from this endeavor so far was more questions and no answers, but at least the trail was not cold. Suddenly everything changed. He immediately noticed Yayuma's body language shift as she began to leak out bloodlust. Sasuke looked around for a threat but saw nothing, just a few scattered couples on park benches far in the distance. As they approached the water fountain, the bloodlust peaked and her internal energy began to broil as she likely prepared to use it. Sasuke immediately began to gather his own chakra as he discarded his previous conclusions about this Yayuma. It was not a seduction mission, it was an assassination. "Issei, would you do something for me?" Yayuma asked sweetly. "Anything, Yayuma-chan." Issei immediately answered fervently. "Would you die for me?" "What?" With no warning, Yayuma blurred and reappeared in the sky wearing. Very little was putting it kindly. Black leather strips covered her unmentionables as she unfurled huge black wings that could only be called angelic. Sasuke had seen many depictions of angels' wings in his books on the occult. Usually they weren't colored ebony black. He could only assume this did not bode well as the typical white-winged angels were generally considered to be messengers and warriors of God. It was simple logic as to what the dark wings likely represented. Hissing in rage, Yayuma spat at Issei from above. "To think I had to sully myself listening to your stupid dreams, to hold your disgusting hand, the indignity. Me, a divine being, having to grub in the dirt with the worms." Yayuma raged. Issei was still staring at her in total shock with his mouth set firmly in an O shape. Suddenly her rage turned to smug satisfaction as she made a spear of light appear out of nowhere. "At least know the name of your executioner. I who have fallen, I who have forsaken the assembly, know me as Raynare?" she yelled as she sent the bolt of light streaking towards the flabbergasted Issei. The bolt of light impacted the ground and exploded, leaving a small crater where Issei had once stood. "Who dares interfere with my vengeance?" Raynare screamed in outrage. "That would be me," Sasuke answered as he blurred back into view just beside the small crater. Raynare smirked. "Another human. For a second there I thought I might actually have to face some upstart devils," she said mockingly as she created another spear of light. Sasuke grinned internally. He should have gone for the kill before she knew he was here, but he had to know more about what was going on and she seemed like a talker. Locking eyes with her, Sasuke activated his dojutsu. "What makes you think I'm just another human? I'm curious as to what your allies at the academy would think about all this." Sasuke gambled as he set out some bait. Raynare seemed offended. "You would group me together with those filthy devils? Obviously you know nothing about the real world and are ignorantly scrambling around in the dirt with the other worms. Die." Creating an impenetrable wall of light spears, Raynare sent them at Sasuke faster than the eye could follow. Sasuke's eyes widened as they impacted. Raynare cackled as the dust cleared, Sasuke clearly impaled in multiple places on his body. Gasping for air, Sasuke spat out blood as he hunched over in agony. Chuckling to herself, Raynare plucked another light spear from the air and started walking towards her down enemy, whistling a merry tune. "Knew you were nothing special. Just another human bug for me to pull the wings off for Azazel Summer." Sasuke struggled to a standing position. "Why target the boy though? He's obviously no threat to you." Raynare laughed haughtily. "Still begging for scraps from your betters? Well, at least you know your place, groveling for information right before you die. Why not? We're killing him specifically because he holds a sacred gear." "What is a sacred gear?" Sasuke coughed out as he slumped over. "Stab." Sasuke grimaced as Raynare impaled his foot with her spear, making him fall down again. "Good pain tolerance for a worthless human. And I will tell you when you can speak trash." Raynare spat at him as she ground the spear around in his foot. As he glared at her from the ground, Raynare resumed speaking. "Figures you stupid humans wouldn't know about the one thing you have that we don't. Your precious God granted humanity sacred gears to try to even the playing field among the races. Since you lot are so pathetically weak, he even gave you a certain number of divine-level sacred gears known as Longinus gears. Azazel Summer believes that Issei is the wielder of the boosted gear, a powerful Longinus that could become a thorn in our side if he was ever turned into a devil." "Turned into a devil?" This time the spear lodged in his hand and was twisted. "What have I told you about interrupting?" Sasuke spat a glob of blood on the ground and stared at her defiantly. Tough, very tough. Maybe you're a half-breed? Most humans are so pathetic they would have long since died from shock by now. I know this firsthand from the last odd 100 humans I have played with like this. Raynare told Sasuke gleefully. You humans are so stupid though, you don't even know about contracts with devils? Guess that's why they get so many of you, through ignorance. Yes, a human can be resurrected as a devil if they are reached before death and a contract can be struck. Here her grin turned nasty. Of course, humans are always desperate and never read the fine print. They get a new life as a devil, but their soul is forfeit to whoever they make the deal with. This means that they are completely bound to the contract holder and have to do whatever they say at all times. There are a lot of humans who would have chosen to room with us down below versus what their masters make them do daily. Sasuke began to breathe shallowly as blood loss set in. Raynare grinned with her teeth. Oh no. Looks like you're to bleed out. Don't worry, I'll send you off with a bang. Raynare chuckled as she whirled her spear and stabbed downward, execution style. Cackling insanely, Raynare left Sasuke's broken body behind as she spied Esei peeking out from a tree a few hundred yards away. Instantly blurring to him through the air, she grabbed him by the collar and threw him forcibly back to where Sasuke's body rested. Every bone in his body broke as he landed. Raynare walked slowly over to the two, letting the boy suffer a bit as she took her time getting there. Stabbing downward, she whispered to the dying boy. Don't blame me, blame God. He put the sacred gear inside you. Raynare told him softly as the light went from his eyes. Sighing in contentment, Raynare began to compose her speech to Azazel Summer as she pranced around the bodies and imagined his reaction to her success. Yes, Azazel Summer, they suffered tremendously. A promotion. Working for you is thanks enough, my lord. My body? Of course, my lord Ween. Suddenly a piercing pain split her chest and the world fractured in black and white. Chidri. Sasuke intoned coldly as he destroyed her heart, his fist jutting out of her chest in a macabre fashion. How? Raynare struggled out as she vomited blood. Simple, you underestimated me. A mere human killed you for your blind hubris. Sasuke told her tonelessly, his Sharingan spinning lazily. Raynare breathed her last as Sasuke emotionlessly dumped her body off his arm in a heap. Deactivating the Chidori, Sasuke sighed deeply. He was glad to be able to save the boy. He had no doubt the psycho would have mercilessly murdered him had he not been present. Given the information he had gathered from Raynare, he could piece together small elements of the supernatural game board as it were. It would appear that fallen angels were one of the factions, though he was surprised that devils were apparently also a competing faction. In the occult books the terms devils, demons and fallen angels were used fairly interchangeably as they all referred to angels that had fallen out of favor with God and been cast out of heaven. Since they were actually completely separate entities, it made him wonder if there was a demon faction out there as well. Food for thought at another time. For now, it was time to clean up this mess and figure out what to do about Esei. He would use the Sharingan to mind wipe him, except for the fact that everybody at the school was in the know about his date. Perhaps he could alter the memories to a believable story where she had slapped him and huffed off, vowing to never speak to him again. It was not like she actually existed as a person with a family in this town, so that may actually work out well. Speaking of the boy, where did he get off to? Still behind the tree wetting himself. Embarrassing but not unexpected. At least it wasn't anything more serious like gibbering to himself out of his mind or running screaming. Even as Sasuke began to adopt the meditative pose necessary to use Earth Chakra, a bright seal of some foreign design lit up beside where Raynare's body lay. Immediately on guard, Sasuke used Shunshin to get behind cover and activated his dojutsu. If multiple allies potentially stronger than Raynare showed up, it would be a hard fight. He had easily killed Raynare because she was arrogant and knew nothing about the Sharingan, thus allowing him to capitalize on the 1v1 nature of the fight to trap her in his genjutsu. Against multiple opponents the same tactic would not work. It took tremendous concentration to actively trap a powerful enemy in your genjutsu. Any outside distractions or attacks could easily dispel the illusion. Rias, Gremory and Kano appeared out of the magical circle, immediately assuming battle stances themselves as they saw the fallen angel's body. "Who's there? We know this fallen angel did not just commit harikari," Kano loudly stated. "Esei must be nearby," Rias murmured to Kano. "He is, though I would know your intentions toward him before you go any further," Sasuke replied as he stepped out of cover. Both the girls' jaws dropped comically. "Sasuke-kun? You killed a fallen angel?" Rias practically yelled. Kuno eyed Sasuke dispassionately as she sized him up. It was obvious to Sasuke that Kuno was the more experienced fighter, even if Rias seemed to have significantly more energy at her disposal. "You're not a normal human. Are you a devil then? Who is your master?" Kuno asked coldly, all business. "You still have not answered my original question and I'm becoming impatient. I assume you are here for Esei. I can also guess as to why you left him with someone so dangerous and only appeared after he should be dead under normal circumstances," Sasuke accused harshly. Rias looked extremely guilty. Kuno showed no change in her frosty expression. "It's not what you think, Wiwaran," Rias began. "You weren't letting a human die a horrible death you could easily prevent so that you could maximize your profit margin by claiming his soul for yourself," Sasuke heartlessly finished for her. Even Kuno raised an eyebrow at that. Rias began to stiffen and get defensive at the accusations. "For someone who claims to be human, you seem to have a deep understanding of how devils operate. One might think you are not being entirely forthcoming, Sasuke-kun." It was at that point that Sasuke made a choice. "Esei is under my protection, he will become my student and work to pay off the debt he owes me for saving his life." It was a gamble, but most of what he had read regarding debts and contracts seemed to hint that there were certain binding laws that both humans and devils had to abide by. Soul debts were the most powerful of course, but life debts were nothing to scoff at. Rias bristled, obviously very put out at being outmaneuvered. Cooler heads prevailed as Kuno calmly grabbed Rias by the shoulder and held a whispered conversation with her. Rias wasn't happy about it, but followed Kuno's lead as they returned to the magical portal. "This isn't over, Sasuke-kun," Rias said calmly while making full eye contact to show she meant business. "I'm counting on it." That's it for today. Please comment for a part 2.